Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, I am joined by author and producer and former director. He was a producer and a director for 20 years in the porn industry, Vic Lagina. Vic is going to be talking about his book, Filthy. He's going to be talking about his experiences and everything that he's up to now. So here we go. Vic, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Well, I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia. I grew up loving TV, films, video games. And I wound up, after graduating high school, going to Syracuse University, undecided, but then decided to work my way into their Newhouse program. And after 4 years of freezing in Syracuse, I decided to move on down to Miami, where I got a job as a production assistant for a corporate and commercial video company, while I also got my master's at University of Miami. So I have two useless degrees in film production. I did a little bit of teaching at college, but I had met a woman that I took down as a model for one of the corporate shoots down in Jamaica. And she said she was moving to LA. And I thought that was a great idea because while work was stable and it was a comfortable living, it wasn't very fulfilling for me. So I followed her into LA, and I had one of those typical crash and burn Hollywood stories where I ended up a lot in debt, mainly because she decided to stop working and wanted to become the Feminem, a white female rapper. And I thought it was a great idea. And that was one of the reasons why I got myself into debt, supporting our dreams. And then one day, when things were getting really tough, I answered an ad on adultstaffing.com. And there was a guy, a young Mexican kid, who was looking to have someone direct his porn film. And I BS'd him. I told him I could do it. And that was my first day in April of 2002. And I did not think that that day would lead me into a long and prolific career in the porn industry. But that's the short of who I am and how I got there. What happened after that was equally entertaining and interesting.
Well, before we get into that, Vic Lagina, how did you come up with that name? That name's pretty interesting.
So I was always under the impression that the porn industry was run by the mafia. So I felt I needed an Italian sounding name, so people wouldn't mess with me. Very naive thinking. That's the way the industry may have been at one point. I know it was, but I was getting into it during the age of internet expansion. And the people that I fell into were computer geeks. So I couldn't just be Vic. And I had to be something interesting. So my best friend, the senator, he has a unique talent of coming up with very funny things that generally have no use whatsoever. But I thought using the name Vic Lagina was the perfect way to kind of set up how I felt about the industry. Don't take yourself too seriously. It's all kind of a big joke. And I just wanted my name to reflect that. So that's how it started.
Okay, well, did being in the porn industry, how did that affect your sex life?
That's a very common question. And I think most people think that in order for it to move the needle, I need ball gags and tying women up and whipping them. That's the furthest thing from the truth. My sex life is very vanilla. And I have just taken it back to the basics, pleasure, romance. I know it sounds kind of weird coming from a pornographer, but the truth is I tried to date within the civilian population. That's what we called regular people. And it went sideways a lot of times because they felt that they kind of looked at me like I was a novelty. And so I decided to start trying to find an undamaged soul in the porn industry. And that was a very fruitless search. Led me to a lot of bad decisions over the years for sure. But I guess I found like a lot of people think, okay, what's it like to have sex with a porn star? Because after a certain point, I just dedicated myself to those in the porn industry, and you know, I guess the litmus test was, do you still have anything to say, or do you want to hang out with this person post ejaculate? And the truth was is that that was like when it was really uncomfortable. Most of the time, there were a couple of gems in there, but for the most part, after finish the job, you have nothing to talk about with a lot of these girls. You know, they some of them treat sex as a handshake, and it was just it went sideways a lot of times. There was the women in these films, a lot of them kind of put on a performance. So I would be hearing the same exact words, phrases, noises that I would hear maybe 4 hours earlier while shooting the sex scene. So, it's all cracked. It's all cracked up to be. And that's a lot of those stories are in my book, Filthy, because I always like to lean into the bizarre and awkward. And those were certainly bizarre and awkward.
Yeah, well, since you mentioned your book, go ahead and tell us about your book, Filthy. Tell us where we can get it and what listeners can expect if they read it.
So if you go to my website, viclagina.com, not only is there a trailer for the book starring James Duval, who was in Donnie Darko, a lot of porn stars as well. That's where you can order it. You can order the print version off of Amazon. You can order the Kindle off of Amazon. There is an audiobook read by me that is on Spotify, Apple Books. That's a fun journey. I had a lot of fun putting that together. And if you want a signed copy, you go on Gumroad. Those are the ways you get it. But the stories, I talk a lot of how did it start? How did it end? And I was really worried that my narrative would not sustain a reader only because, look, my relationships were train wrecks a lot, and everyone loves a good train wreck. And even though that was a lot of it, I felt like it needed more. So what I wound up doing was writing an additional 100 pages of material that focus on more of other aspects of the industry. There are 9 lessons of Vic Lagina's School of Porn that deal with, hygiene. Very, very passionate topic of mine because I have dealt with a lot of unhygienic women, both personally and in the industry. But you also learn about how to prep for anal. Is it squirt or pee? Conduct in the industry, all of these things. And then there's the more sobering aspects of it, which is when I reminisce and talk about those who died in the industry. And it really puts a spotlight on the pain and the trauma and the sadness and the darkness that is in this industry. And then there's also the fly on the wall experiences, that is the prologue and the epilogue. But I really wanted to give the readers the feeling of what it was like to walk in my shoes while I was in the industry. And a lot of people have said that I really nailed the mark. It's very brutally honest. It's raw. I'm honest mostly about myself. And I really had fun. It was a long process, 8.5 years to write the print copy. And then I spent about 50 days recording the audiobook, which was very joyous. There's a lot of audio clips from the things that I'm talking about. And it's a little bit of like an LSD trip if you really listen to it. And I suggest if people don't have the time to read, the audiobook is for them.
Speaking of a LSD trip, is drug use rampant in the porn industry?
I would say yes. There have been a lot of overdoses, which I cover in the book. There was mine. I can talk about mine. I used to be a more of a hallucinogen, weed, booze kind of guy. But when I was talking about darkness, and this is when the light went off in my head about why I was medicating with the bad drugs. And when I say bad drugs, cocaine was the one. I never got into opiates. I never got into methamphetamines or any of that stuff. But the cocaine was what I was using as a crutch because of all the darkness that was around me and that I was absorbing on a daily basis. And I think what happened was when I was started writing the book in early 2015, and I was getting it out and I was reading it, I was acknowledging what a train wreck my life had become, and that's when I started pumping the brakes on the harder substances and focusing more on the psychedelics. Which, to be honest with you, they healed me. A lot of people are leery of psychedelics, but in a lot of ways, they broke down a lot of emotional barriers that I built up over the years. A lot of it stemming from my mother's death when I was 15, and it really got me on the lighter side of the fence. And then once I was out of the industry, I didn't need it anymore. So I've tapered off significantly. And I thank COVID for ending my career because I don't know if I would have survived. I might have ended up like another rest in porn that there have been so many of.
Well, do you feel like you suffered any mental health issues while in the porn industry or because of the porn industry?
I can say that I was teetering on the line of madness at one point towards the end, for sure. I'd say things were starting to wear pretty thin in 2019 and 2020. A lot of it really came down to those who I was working for, the overlords who owned the porn monopoly, such as Pornhub and Brazzers, which I was shooting for. And they just sucked all the joy out of the job. So what I would have to do is go to a music festival and re-energize myself, my soul, my spirit, so I can come back and shoot more porn for the masses. But I think if I had gone further, there could have been some kind of meltdown or sort. So I have a lot of gratitude, ironically, for COVID because in a lot of ways it saved me.
Okay. Who were your favorite performers to shoot and why?
Those who made their flights from LA to Las Vegas, that showed up with a smile on their face, that were happy to be there, that were appreciative to be there, and didn't make it about them. That wanted to, you have to realize production is a collective job, it's a group effort. And a lot of performers made it about them and their problems and their nonsense. So the answer to the question was those who were professional. Now I can name a bunch of them. The Angela Whites, the Monique Alexanders, the Alina Lopez's, mostly a lot of the girls from this one agency, Spiegler girls. They were, for the most part, you knew what to expect when a Spiegler girl was on your set. But, Nicole Aniston, she was very vanilla, but she was so like a feast on the eyes that you're like, this girl could have been really anything with her life, but she chose porn. And by her own admission, she would say she was a terrible porn star, but she was extremely popular. But overall, that's who I really enjoyed because they were just wonderful to be around. And that's who I would hire again and again and again if I could, because I knew what to expect.
What was the grossest thing that you witnessed while being in the porn industry?
The grossest thing I'd say was when there was bad hygiene. There was one girl, she was a Brazzers contract star, and it was a boy, girl, girl scene, which is a man and two women. And the entire soundstage smelled like her vagina. And I just kept wondering, like, how on earth do you not smell that? Are you immune? So a lot of experiences like that. There was also times, when anal scenes go wrong. They don't prep correctly. Perhaps their colon is not agreeing with them. But when you have messy days like that, those would be the gross ones. And then I would also say, squirting was a very big, popular like niche for a while, and a lot of girls couldn't squirt. So, and when they did, it was clear as day, not what was coming out of them, that was more yellow, that it was urine. And when you hit like a very big urine stench, it's kind of a downer. But then, the other side of the coin is a lot of the women knew that if they drank an abundance of Pedialyte, their quote unquote squirt, which was their pee, was clear and apparently it tasted sweet, like candy. So other performers would do a lot of kind of nasty things with that liquid, if you catch my drift. So those really were the days when you're dealing with human excretions of sorts.
Okay, well, what are you doing now that you've got out of the industry?
So for a while there was a lot of existential examination. I was reading a lot. I fortunately never reproduced, so I was able to leapfrog into retirement a lot earlier than most people. And I was very smart with my money over the years, paying down my house, reducing my nut as much as possible. And I had time to think. Plus, I had bought my second studio. So when I sold it, I made double what I paid for it in like 6 years. And that was stability in terms of the future. So, writing the book and finishing the book was one project. I think what I need to do now is continue writing or at least recording and talking more about those days in the trenches, because that's what I think a lot of people like to hear about, especially in the way I tell it, which is brutally honest with a lot of wit and sarcasm. I've also gotten better at the piano. While COVID happened, I took it up again. Third time was the charm because I practice all the time now. And yeah, I'm just trying to figure out what's next. I'm in a relationship, which is great. She lives with me, and I hang out with my girlfriend all day because she's successful in her own right. So it's almost heavenly. I sometimes joke that I died, because I got a bad batch of drugs a while back, and this is heaven because it does feel heavenly.
Well, tell us about any upcoming projects that you're working on that listeners need to know about.
Well, nothing of yet, although I'm going to stick, I think, more with the recorded entries and perhaps digital entries in the tales from the filthy trenches. That will be coming relatively soon. That was my project for 2025. And I'm going to just create more content the only way I know how. I mean, this was really what I was trained for. So I'm going to do it and just kind of still lean into the whole Vic Lagina thing, even though that person was conjured up to shoot porn. And that's kind of what the title is about: Filthy, the Rise and Pending Death of Vic Lagina. Because we're all pending death, that's for sure. But Vic Lagina didn't really need to exist anymore once I was done shooting it. So I guess I will resurrect him in a sort of way to continue on talking about all of this insanity, because I did shoot 3,792 scenes over my career. So there's more gold in those hills for sure.
Okay, well, you already gave out your website, viclagina.com. So close us out with some final thoughts. Maybe if that was something I forgot to talk about that you would like to touch on, any final thoughts you have for the listeners.
Well, I mean, I'm also on X and IG at Vic Lagina, but final thoughts. Well, I was nominated for an AVN award that's happening in 2 weeks for Mainstream Project of the Year. Now, I don't know if I'll win it. I'm trying hard because I feel my acceptance speech will be monumental. So I hope I win in that purpose. It's kind of funny that they nominated me because I kind of goof on AVN a lot in the book because I always found it so silly. This whole taking ourselves very seriously in porn. I just never understood it. It never made sense to me. But a lot of people in the industry, they take themselves very seriously.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. If you know of anybody that wants to know what it's like to be a porn producer, send them to viclagina.com, share this episode, follow, rate, review, jump on your favorite podcast app, check out the show, share it. If you have any guest or suggestion topics, Curtis Jackson 1978 at att.net is the place to send them. Thank you for listening and supporting the show. And Vic, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. I had a pleasure, and I love hearing your voice. It's amazing.
For more information on the Living the Dream podcast, visit www.djcurveball.com. Until next time, stay focused on living the dream.